Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Would you take a moment and wherever you listen to this podcast, go ahead and rate our show so that other innovators like you can find us. My guest today is Hunter Hastings. Hunter is an economist who took up a career in corporate marketing and occupied post of chief marketing officer, also CEO, senior partner, and so many different roles. We're going to get into that and talk about those career paths a little bit today. But for the last several years, he's been an advisor to Fortune 500 organizations talking about customer motivation and service strategy. He's also an adjunct professor, co-authored over 7 books spanning business and economics. So very excited for you to talk to and meet Hunter today. And he also holds a master's degree from Cambridge University in the UK. Welcome to the podcast, Hunter.
Thank you very much, Natalie. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, let's take a moment and talk a little bit about your professional background. Obviously, you've had an incredible span across your career. You've done many different things. I would love to just talk a little bit about that and even some of the bodies of work that you've written or wrote upon.
Well, yes, thank you. I like to look at the dynamics of what I've experienced personally as indicative of what's going on in the marketplace, both for organization and for innovation. So, as you said, I started out a professional career in corporations, corporate marketing. And I was very fortunate. I worked for a company called Procter & Gamble that makes household products. But they had a wonderful approach to marketing, which is our target customer was mom. And mom's running a household, and we want to help her run that household. We want her to feel good about us, feel good about herself, feel good about the household. The fancy economic word for that is subjective value. You know, what's important to mom is what is valuable. So I learned that at P&G. I then advanced into some other consulting companies and other client companies in food and beverage and so on, but always trying to apply that insight, which is the customer's the boss, and she or he, if it's another kind of customer, is the boss for emotional, subjective reasons, personal reasons, individual reasons. And so that was a guideline throughout my career. And then I got called to be a CEO in Silicon Valley. And one of the things you see there in technology companies is they can forget the customer. They get very involved with technology and functions and efficiency of the software and so on, which is all very important, but you've got to keep remembering what is the customer going to use it for and how does he or she feel about that. So then after Silicon Valley, I started a consulting company to take that idea of branding for global products and global brands. So I enjoyed that. That was very successful, and then dialed it back a little bit. And so my last stint was as a general partner in a venture capital company, an early stage, seed stage venture capital, where we could look at entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, inject that idea of understanding customers, and try to see if that resulted in successful growth, which happily it did. So that's been my thread throughout.
I love this because, so much of what we on this platform talk about just in terms of innovation deals with putting the customer at the center of everything you build. And I love just listening to your early career as you talk about your early days at Procter & Gamble and how they really set the methodology and the mindset for how you looked at this. I would imagine that when you were doing this work, it was probably fairly rare and maybe not even talked about in other sectors, which I think is what made it special. Right now we have design thinking, and whether or not people follow those principles or practices, I think we can all point to them and say, hey, that's good and right to put the customer at the center. But do you feel like Procter & Gamble was ahead of its time when it was doing that and when you were a part of that in kind of the early stages?
Well, it's certainly very unique and very dominant for what it did. In fact, as I said, I've spent a lot of time reselling that intellectual property because it was quite rare. But as you know, I wrote a book called Aberrant Capitalism with my friend Steve Denning, and we looked at corporations in the second half of the 19th century, and we felt that that idea of customer capitalism was much more dominant then. And we looked at companies like Standard Oil. John D. Rockefeller is famous for being a robber baron. But if you read what he wrote, he said, "I am bringing affordable illumination to the families of America." This is the 1800s. They're stuck in their homes. When the sun goes down, they can't work with educating their kids. They can't work in the barn. They can't have a family life very easily. He brought them affordable illumination. He talked about that all the time. He said it's civilizing. It helps civilization advance. So the 19th century corporations were entrepreneurial, to use your word, Natalie. They put the customer first. How can I improve their lives? How can we make it better? And there's such a lot of examples about that. Quaker Oats and Sears and Roebuck and so on. It's all in the book. What happened in the 20th century was that the entrepreneurs left and managers took over. And management brought with it a couple of things that tend to take away the focus on the customer at the center, as you call it. One is bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So all these smart people figured out that they needed bureaucracies to run these companies, and the bureaucracy does not have the customer in mind. It has rules and regulations and efficiency and methods and processes in mind. So you tend to lose some attention on the customer. And the second thing that happened was financialization, where value for the customer was still important. Got to make money, got to have customers. But then it was diverted into the financial sector, to a narrow group of shareholders and stockholders. I'm all for that. We need Wall Street, but a lot of the value was predatorily taken away and given to a sliver of the population. And so, again, you lose focus on the customer. The customer is the source of value, but they're not getting value back. And then, so I think Procter & Gamble was rare in that case. They didn't entirely escape from bureaucracy, but they had this tremendous focus on the customer. I think it's coming back. I think the new business models of the 21st century are directly connected to the customer. Amazon's one of the great examples. Whatever the customer wants to buy, what color they want, what product, what the latest version is, they're directly telling Amazon that. Amazon is hyper automating its supply chain in order to serve the customer. So I do feel that customer capitalism is coming back through entrepreneurship at this big scale, but we haven't got rid of the bureaucracy. And so we need organizational innovation as well as business model innovation. I think it's coming.
So talk a little bit about how do you surface if bureaucracy and financialization are kind of sitting as a layer in your organization that's preventing innovation? What are some of the signs that you can see within your organization? We have several entrepreneurs, several, C-levels that listen to this podcast, and they may be saying, this makes sense, that's right. But how do they surface that this exists, that we've gone down this route? What are some maybe telltale signs? And then how can they begin to maybe infuse some innovation back into those places that have been kind of stifled, if you will?
Right. And the mental model for that, Natalie, is removal of barriers. So you create the flow model. The information from the customer is flowing in as it flows into Amazon. Keep that kind of visual in mind. Then it needs to get to everywhere in the corporation equally. It needs to get to production. It needs to get to marketing. It needs to get to customer relations. It needs to go everywhere in the company. And then it needs to be able to come back quickly as response, as innovation. So you can build that mental model, and then you can say, what are the barriers to that? Where can I find barriers? And that's a creative workshop. It's a great thing to do with your department or your company. Say, what are the barriers to that flow? And some of them might be reporting processes. Hey, it takes me 15 approvals to get this new project approved. Or it might be resource allocation. Well, we've got a budget, so we can't change it. And so you can't have more money for that particular activity, even though it seems to get customer response. So you you look at all the barriers, and you can make a list of them, and you can make a list of which one's the most important. And then you say, well, how can I remove these? How can I do that? And often the removal of management layers is the way to do that. So removal of hierarchy, removal of structure, much more individual collaboration. One of the things that's starting a lot, Natalie, is the team is becoming the focus of organization. So I might have a marketing team working on a particular product. I might have somebody from finance on that team because we need that. We need to have somebody from productions. They understand the marketing variables. The team becomes the unit, and that's much more important. You don't have management on a team. You have collaboration. You have equal participation. Somebody leads when they've got the most important information, then they step back and somebody else takes over. So I do think we're getting organizational innovation. We're doing it by the removal of barriers, get things that are in the way out of the way.
I love that. So leaning into just some of the things you said here, cross-functional teams that can execute, I think that's a very powerful thought. And then also the mapping of what your innovation stream looks like today, if anything, right? Because some people may not even have a way for the customer to signal something and then for that relay back to the organization. If we don't have that, then innovation from a customer lens could be fundamentally broken within the organization. So that relay is critical. And then, like you said, once you map that out, looking at that and saying, now where are all the barriers or all the bureaucracy that prevents us from actually being able to move quickly, especially when we pick up a pattern with customers and innovation. I would love to just talk a little bit more about that because I think that's really, you're getting into some of the fundamentals of innovation. And so if you're looking at your organization and saying either we have a lot of barriers, we don't pull together cross-functional teams, or we have a very bureaucratic process to get things done. These are all signs, as I was asking for earlier. So thank you for these. These are all signs that you need to kind of disrupt yourself right before you're disrupted as an organization.
Right. Just an aside, I don't like the word disruption because I think it's defensive. We should all be disrupting all the time. So that's the positive way to look at it. I think today we can add another layer. Layer is probably not the right word, but another kind of piece of the organization, which is the data layer, the data and analytics layer. So again, to take our analogy, get all this data pouring in from the customer and from the market and from retailers and wherever you're getting it from. Before it hits any human being making a judgment, it can run through the data layer, the AI layer, that can analyze it for those insights, those patterns that you said, Natalie, maybe even rank them or put some potential future revenue against them or something like that, based on parameters that your team has put in there. And the insights come out, and then the humans start to act on them. That's where the human in the loop comes in. And maybe it's not a cross-functional team, Natalie. Maybe it's a dynamic team that is aiming at some goal and will pull together all of the people that we need to achieve that goal in the best possible way. And that goal may be a function. It may be marketing. I need to tell customers about this opportunity. It may be operations. I need to make delivery more efficient. But it's not that it's cross-functional. It's people collaborating with each other in the right way at the right time against the right goal. So that tends to be bottom up. It tends to be not management. It tends to be people coming together. Now, we haven't quite figured that out yet, but there are some great examples out there. It's being called by some self-management or self-organization. There've been a lot of experiments. We maybe haven't got it all right yet, but it's certainly coming. And so the future of management then is no management. It's self-management. So I think you do that from the bottom up. You're the one who's trying to advance this project, so you're the one who's going to find the barriers, and that's how it comes about.
I actually feel very excited about the promise of the future of management being no management, because I think that this idea of self-management, and like you said, tests are being done. I don't know if there are organizations out there, but the flatter the organization, I feel personally like ideas can move through a flatter organization. a lot faster than when you put those unnecessary layers in place. And now, in order to get anything done, you have to move through all the layers. It has to relay all the way up to the top, relay back all the way down to the bottom. And then there you're deciding if you're going to act versus saying, we have an idea, let's put the team on it, surface the best ideas and move it forward. And so, very much, I think that the self management of especially innovation is a very powerful thing, removing any if or all barriers that you can in order to surface ideas quickly.
Yeah, I think you said something critical there. That's speed. The speed, not for its own sake, but speed of knowledge, speed of learning. That's the dynamic that is going to get us ahead in innovation. There is one model that people talk about in my world, Natalie, and it'll be a strange sounding company to you. It's called Morningstar.
And yep.
It's a tomato processing company. It's $1 billion tomato processing company. It's number one in its niche. It's got 3 major plants. It serves the world. Everybody in America eats Morningstar products. Hugely successful. Totally run by self-management. And there's plenty of books you can read about it, but essentially people gather together, as we said, and they make mutual commitments. So we're both working together on the operations team. Here's my commitment to you, Natalie. Here's what I know. Here's what I'll do. Here's what you can expect from me. Now, what can I expect from you? And individuals do that as pairs. A team is typically 7 to 10 people. They review that all the time. Hey, how are our mutual commitments being kept? Are we living up to that? Do we need to change it? We need to improve them. So it's dynamic. And then you get a network of those teams working together, and maybe one team talks to another team about shared commitments and so on. And they've been doing it for 30 years, I think. And it's been very, very successful. So that's the great model. There are a few other additional ones out there, but that's one thing we can look at and say, hey, this can work.
That's very powerful. I really love that idea. And I'll look into Morningstar a little bit more. I'm familiar with the company, but not that model. I'd love to shift gears a little bit and just say, when you're thinking about kind of the world of entrepreneurship and moving from imagining ideas to actually getting them implemented, let's talk about that for a little bit, because I think that's a whole nother factor. So let's say that you move through all of this, you begin to surface ideas, surface them rapidly. How do you move out of the boardroom where we're just talking about these ideas into actually beginning to get some implementation under your belt?
Yeah, and the process is actually the opposite of the way most people think about it, Natalie. It's working backwards. And so you have to imagine the future where you've done all that implementation. And you've got to imagine it in great detail. How is the customer going to receive my product? What are they going to pay for it? What are the features that they want? How's it going to work when it gets in their factory or their office? What are all the details of their expectation? And that's got to be in context. They're not living in your boardroom. They're living in their factory or their office. I came out of the household goods industry, so I think of the mom's kitchen as a system. She's got all the machines. She's got the cupboards. The food has to get in the cupboards, and then it's got to get to the cooker, and then she's got to have the pans. And how does all that system work? And if we're going to put sensors in there to tell the grocer when the fridge is empty and it needs refilling and take mom out of the loop, how is that going to work exactly? See, imagine that future, and then you work backwards, step by step. Well, what are the components? What are the things that have to come together to do that? And then for each component, how do I assemble that and connect it and automate it? And then working one step back, where do I get the raw materials and what people do I need and what are the skills? So you work the system backwards. And then once you've got to the beginning, you run it forwards again, and that's your marketplace test or your implementation. So the mental model has to change. Your production is always been thought of as you start and you add and you complete and you get to the end. And we've got to start thinking of it as, here's the end. How do I get there? And I think that's the way that the world is going. We just got to reverse people's thinking from the flow, which comes from the customer, as a flow, as opposed to a flow from the factory or the production or the engineer.
I love what you're saying here, because There's a couple things, a couple words that I just pulled out of some of what you were saying here. One is vision. I mean, I think that oftentimes we don't have a vision for where we're going, and part of what you're talking about imagining the future is going out, extrapolating out that vision of what it's going to look like for the customer or many customers to be engaging with this, and then to back into what are some of the processes, the systems, some of those things, like begin to work backwards to the start. I think what's interesting is, and I think this is true inherently of IT or technology organizations, is that oftentimes they do fall in love with the technology. They do fall in love with being being a part of solving something and not necessarily falling in love with the customer's problem. And so giving yourself a vision for what is this going to look like in 2 years, and now start to back into the actions or the thought processes that need to surround that, I think is a very powerful exercise, because going out into the future, when you do that, right, that's when things may start to break in terms of assumptions we have, things we thought we understood that we actually need to spend more time on. I think that is a very brilliant way to think about innovation. And I think most people think they inherently do that. But if you sit down with a team, I just did this today. I had a brainstorming session with a customer, and I thought I had thought through everything, but then they started to pressure test it. And we had this great conversation of going back and forth and saying, what about this? We didn't think about that. How is this going to actually work? How are you going to take payment? And I think there's something beautiful about, oftentimes I see a lot of engineers sit in their own room and kind of design the whole thing versus getting out there in the world, talking to each other, talking to customers. It's a very powerful thing.
Well, that's brilliantly said, Natalie. And let me add one little dimension to that is you're not just thinking about how the customer is going to use that product and all of those features. You're asking them, or you need to understand, how are they going to feel?
Mm.
And so what are the examples from history? I don't know, you're probably too young to remember the BlackBerry, but the
Yeah.
BlackBerry
No, I
was
had one.
okay, so did I. It was a genius piece of technology. And it crammed all those little keys into a tiny little keyboard that you pounded with your thumbs. And we loved it. We thought this was
Yes.
absolutely fabulous. But eventually, customers got to the point where they said, "This is really hard. Yeah, I wish it wasn't so hard to type on your BlackBerry." And then Steve Jobs and the iPhone people came up with the touchscreen. They weren't the first ones to do it, but they made it much more convenient. So to actually imagine that the customer is going to become frustrated with your fabulous piece of BlackBerry technology is that's hard to do. So we call that engineers with empathy.
Hmm.
You've got to be empathic about the customer in the future. I think you'll find that now in the you've got the first crude iterations of AI. I talk to ChatGPT all the time, and I feel better about that than the Google search bar, because I can make my query much more conversational and get a conversation back and say, hey, what if this, what if that? And I just feel more reassured by that than I do with the Google search bar. Over time, Google's going to lose search market share because of that empathic preference of the customer for ChatGPT. So there's so many activities like that. We old people talk about Henry Ford, and he said if you asked customers about what they wanted, they'd say faster horses. They couldn't think of the automobile, but they could think, hey, horses are a real problem. They're messy and they're expensive and they don't go very fast. And so they've got dissatisfaction, we call it, or unease. And if that's the way to pluck out the innovation opportunities, what are they uneasy about? What do they wish could be better? Even though it might be fabulous today, I just wish it could be a little bit better. I have a sneaking feeling. And that's what you're looking for.
I love that. How much in your career and what you've seen falls into the Henry Ford quotes and even the Steve Jobs quotes that would say the customer doesn't know what they want, versus kind of this, I think, other empathetic path. We would think that we wouldn't design it without the customer's voice as a part of it. I feel like sometimes these things are held in tensions and almost held against one another. But I almost think that there could be a marrying of that. But I would love to just know your thoughts on the tension between Steve Jobs, Henry Ford were like, they don't know. We got to just go do it, build it. And hey, we're going to put the customer at the center of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's the magic of entrepreneurship. It's so wonderful. So the customer does know what they want, or at least they know what they want to be better. They don't know what they can want. They don't know what technology can bring them. So if you imaginatively broke down that Henry Ford conversation, the customer would be saying, I don't want this mess. I don't want this slowness. I don't have to brush this horse down at the end of the day. All those kinds of things. That's wanting, right? They know what they want. They want something better than that. They don't know what they can want. They didn't know they can want a touch screen. They didn't know that they can want a phone without keys. They didn't know if they could want an automobile. So there's magic in entrepreneurship. It's the magic of going from the customer saying, I think something could be better, to, hey, how about this? I have built this and I think this addresses your need. So the two go together. What you can't do is separate them. You can't build the technology track on its own without checking with what the customer wants. So you're quite right. It's an integration, it's an interplay, it's an interaction. Getting into theory, the theory of systems, which we're starting to learn more about today, is that interaction is the vital part. How individuals interact, and then how they interact with their environment, which we might call the technology space the environment. And it's, to your point, Natalie, it's about speeding that up, learning about it, getting insights from it, seeing the patterns. So that the two go together. It's interaction.
I love that you merge those because it does make sense that while they don't know, they may not know what they can want. I like the way you said that because it makes a lot of sense. They know what is frustrating today. They know what's not working today. You can even see the workarounds that they're doing today to use what you've provided them. And I think even those workarounds provide us future ideas, future innovations. And so I love the way you phrased that and kind of helped us think through that. And the can want is hopefully where you come in, right, to provide that step change for them into the future, knowing their needs, knowing their wants. And I wrote down even knowing how it makes them feel, which
Mhm.
that's leading into the deepest parts of empathy when we get into designing something for a customer.
Right. This is going to be typical of the new companies in the 21st century. I think this understanding of empathy. They say a little bit of magic in it. You can't actually get inside the head of the customers, which is what empathy sometimes is taken to mean. But you can sort of understand how their mental model is working and match yours to theirs. So it's a skill. It's a human skill. This word imagination, it's fascinating to me. I can imagine something in the future that hasn't happened. It's never happened. It's counterfactual. It's not real, but I can imagine it. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that brilliant? That's what entrepreneurs do.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's one of the core facets of what it means to be an entrepreneur, to imagine a future that doesn't exist. And I love
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So, Hunter, in our last time together, I would love a couple things if you would give us just some of your final thoughts. And then I really want people to be able to connect with you and your content. So please let us know as well how to do that.
Well, in the book that I wrote, we called it The Decline and Revival of Customer Capitalism. So as I said, the customer is at the center very much in the early days of the corporation. It kind of got a little bit of eclipsed in the managerial era, but the exciting part of our 21st century is the customer's coming back. The customer's the boss. The customer's a genius. I love this idea that they can, even with everything we've given them, they can still want something better. That is genius. That's the energy in the system. It's the drive. It's the flow. So I just love that. And as we put the customer more at the center, then great things are going to happen. So I'm excited about the new time.
Where can people find you personally?
Well, I'd like to send them to two places. One is thevaluecreators.com. And one of the items there is a course that we've built online to try and help people to get into this mode of what we call subjective value, understanding empathy, understanding customers, understanding the design process. We've got a number of top selected business school professors who teach it. We've got a lot of content, a lot of self-assessment, so you can see if you're getting the material. So please go to that. We think it'll be helpful. I have a blog called hunterhastings.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I love to have people contact me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time today. Here's what I can tell our audience. I really want you to go get more of Hunter's content, read his books. This is just, you can tell this is a deep wealth of knowledge. And for those of us who love the space of innovation, just dive into the well of knowledge that's in Hunter. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you very much, Natalie. This was wonderful. I appreciate it very much.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. And remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.